Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Wednesday, October the 29th, 2025, and this is our midweek Bible study on the Gospel of Matthew that we have been systematically going through now for some weeks. And today we're going to be in chapters 20 and 21. And as the camera operator was setting it up to be podcast on YouTube, I was mentally going over in my head that we probably, not counting today, we probably have 4 other weeks. So we're going to finish this study of Matthew probably by the end of November. And then we'll do our next study after that, which will be on the book of Hebrews. Because Matthew has 28 chapters, and today we're covering Matthew chapters 20 through 21. And it's getting to the point in the Gospel of Matthew where we're about to be discussing the events of Jesus' going to Jerusalem, being questioned by all kinds of various groups of religious leaders who are looking for something to trap him on, being arrested, falsely charged. Pilate declares him not guilty, but the religious leaders put Pilate in a box and say that we're going to threaten you with reporting you to Caesar if you don't let us have this man to be crucified. Jesus is paying the sin penalty for mankind, his death, his burial, and his resurrection and some post-resurrection appearances. So we're getting to the climax of the gospel story from Matthew's point of view. And remember, Matthew is one of the 12 apostles. He has been with Jesus throughout his public ministry. He is an eyewitness to each of these accounts. And as you're very familiar with, I am using my precept notebook to do this. And I have the text of Scripture printed out so that I can make observations and notes on here for both Matthew 20 and 21. And what I'm going to walk you through here is the outline for chapter 20. And it always, at the precept study, it always has a place at the top for you to write either a sentence or a bullet statement, a short phrase that basically is helping you outline the book so that later on when you need to remember where something is, where's that parable, or where's that miracle, or where's that important theology point, you've got the outline right at the top. So Matthew chapter 20 basically is 5 separate paragraphs where Matthew is dealing with things that he's remembering years later, and he's writing down for people in his day and time, some of whom are Jewish believers, some of whom have become believers in Christ from a Gentile background, and he's giving as much information as he thinks is important for both those groups to know who Jesus is and what his mission is. And one of the main themes of Matthew's gospel is Jesus teaching about what the kingdom of heaven is like. So paragraph 1 would be verses 1 through 7, because remember, they didn't write in chapter and verse form, they just wrote the book. 1 through 7 deals about the vineyard workers and who's last and first in the kingdom. And then verses 8 through 16 deals with payday and why God has the right to reward everybody, either the same or give more or less. Then verses 17 through 23. Then verses 24 through 28. Then 29 through 34. So let's go through them systematically here. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. When he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he also went out at about the 3rd hour. That would be like 9 o'clock in the morning. The way they counted time in the Bible, you'll see this, particularly when you're looking at the Gospels. The period from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. was the nighttime, and it was divided into 3 watches. or 4 watches of 3 hours each. So the first watch is from 6 p.m. to 9, the second watch from 9 to midnight, the third watch from midnight to 3, and the fourth watch from 3 to 6 a.m. But when it comes to the daytime, they'll refer to it by the hours, and starting at 6 a.m., it'll be the first hour, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, right on up through 6 p.m. So the third hour, we're looking at 9 o'clock in the morning, the way you and I count time. So this vineyard owner, at the break of day, 6 a.m., went and hired a bunch of people. Hey, I'll give you this coin, this denarius, if you'll go work in my field and collect the produce out of my vineyard all day long. And they agreed to that wage. The vineyard owner realizes he needs more workers. So at 9 a.m., he's going and he's hiring more workers. At about the third hour, he saw others standing idly by the marketplace. And to those he said, you also go and work in the vineyard, and whatever is right, I'll give to you. And so they went. See, with the first group, he had an agreed upon set price. With this second group, they're not agreeing to go work for a denarius. He just says, I need more workers. If you'll go work in my field, I'll pay you what's right. And they agreed to that, not knowing how much or how little they were going to be paid, and they're out in the field working. Again, he went out about the 6th hour, that would be noon, and the 9th hour, 3 p.m., and did the same thing. At about the 11th hour, that would be 5 p.m. to you and me, he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day long? They said to him, because no one hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. Now, in that last group, the 5 o'clock crowd, why are you standing idly by? Well, nobody hired us. Well, he's already been out to the vineyard at 6, at 9, at noon, at 3, and now it's 5 o'clock. They showed up late. They might not have been terribly interested in doing a lot of work, but they showed up at the marketplace where people were known to hire day laborers, but they've shown up at the very tail end of the day, and they're thinking nobody's going to hire them. In our day and time, there are people who go through the motions of pretending to look for work, but for various reasons, whenever somebody offers them something, that they find some reason why they can't do it. Jesus is talking to a first century crowd, and Matthew's remembering this. And remember what Matthew used to do before he became a believer in Jesus? He was a tax collector. The tax collector goes and collects taxes for the government based on what people possess and what they've earned. So this would have been of particular interest to Matthew, that as the story is going to unfold, Jesus is going to wind up paying the people who showed up at the very last the same amount that he paid the people who'd been working in his field all day. He sent them into the vineyard. Verse 8. When evening came, 6 o'clock, time to stop working, it's about to get dark, so they're done for the day. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last group first. When those he hired at the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. When those who were hired first came, they thought they would receive much more. But each of them also received a denarius. And when they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden and the scorching heat of the day. But he answered and said to them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go. But I wish to give to the last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is it because your eye is envious because I'm generous? So the last shall be first and the first last. Matthew could put himself into the position of those workers. You and I, whether we want to admit it or not, we can put ourselves into the position of those workers. You can almost hear it when the group that had been there all day saw the Johnny-come-latelys getting a full denarius, and they'd only been in the field an hour. Hey, surely we're going to get a big bonus. And when they're handed the salary that they had agreed to, you can almost hear them yelling, unfair! And of course, Jesus telling the parable, what's unfair about it? The money's mine. You agreed to work for me for a day. Yes, you spent 12 hours in the field, and you get a denarius. And yes, these other people only spent 1 hour, and I've chosen to give them a denarius. But wasn't it my money to begin with? You know, they're pouting, they're grumbling, they're focusing on somehow they think they've been cheated, when really it was what they agreed to all along. But you see, the parable isn't about really a day's wage. It's about that gift of salvation. Some of us who have been believers for a long time and been out there trying to live the Christian life and trying to support our church and to support missionaries and to do good things for God, when we get to heaven and we see somebody in heaven that waited almost until it was time to die before they finally listened to the people who had been witnessing to them for decades, and they got into heaven by the skin of their teeth, we're not supposed to be grumbling then, because have we really earned our salvation? No. It's a free gift. The fact that we accepted Christ a long time before somebody else did doesn't make us more special than somebody else. Now, yes, in heaven, there will be crowns of rewards for the works that we have done. And people who have worshiped God and worked for God with a sincere heart, not the ulterior motive of, hey, look at me, look at what I'm doing for God, but who have sincerely followed Jesus and taken care of others and shared the gospel out of love for the Lord. Yes, we will receive a crown of rewards that we will also cheerfully immediately give back to the Lord in gratitude for our salvation. And the ones who maybe came in at the very last minute, the only reward they have is their salvation. But salvation is a huge reward. Jesus wanted his followers to know that works isn't what does it for you. That it's the sincerity of your heart, that it's recognizing that the gift comes from the gift giver, the person who owns everything. The vineyard owner in this story can do what he wants to with his money. And if he's chosen to be generous to those who came last, if he's chosen to show compassion on them, he hasn't in any way shortchanged the ones who've been there from the get-go. Then in verse 17, Jesus now has finished teaching that parable and leaving the crowd to mentally chew on it for a little bit, to ponder it, to start to think and examine their own hearts. Hey, why am I serving God? Am I doing it as a quid pro quo? I'll do this, God, if you'll do that for me. Is this really an emotional business encounter? Or am I cheerfully laboring for my Lord without thought of whether or not I get a reward at all, and without being jealous of somebody else to whom God chooses to show mercy? He's letting them now think about it. So in verse 17, as Jesus was about to go up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside by themselves. And on the way, he said to them, because remember, the crowd heard the whole teaching about the vineyard owner. But Jesus is getting the 12 aside because they're on the way to Jerusalem. And Jesus knows what they're going to face in Jerusalem. That there's death on a cross and resurrection and suffering in the immediate future. And he wants to make sure that his chosen 12 get it, because they're going to be entrusted with carrying on the work when he returns to his heavenly home. And so he's pouring teaching into them. So he's pulled them aside, and he's telling them now in verse 18, behold, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man, that's one of Jesus' titles that he has borrowed from the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel called himself Son of Man. The Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priest and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and will hand him over to the Gentiles to mock and scourge and crucify him. And on the third day he'll be raised up. It's a hard thing for them to hear. They understand it. They hear it, but they don't like it. They know what it means to be mocked by the religious crowd. They certainly know what it means to be scourged. They've seen the Romans scourge people time after time for stepping out of line. They know what crucifixion is. And they're hearing it, but they don't want to hear it. They don't want to internalize it. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, this would be James and John, two of his three closest disciples. She's also Jesus' aunt. The mother of James and John is Mary's sister. So she's coming up to her sons and to Jesus. The mother of the sons of Zebedee came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, what do you wish? She said to him, command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right and one on your left. She's asking her nephew, yes, I know you're coming into your kingdom, but let me play the family card. Let me ask for the special privileges, the highest seats of honor for my two boys. One on your right-hand side, who would be the next heir, and number two on the left-hand side. She's wanting to work the family connection to gain position for her sons. And the boys are obviously clearly willing to go along with it because they're standing there too. But Jesus answered and said, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm able to drink? And they said to him, we're able. Notice Jesus isn't even replying back to his aunt. He's talking to his cousins, his grown men disciples, two of the three guys in his inner circle. You don't know what you're asking for. Are you able to drink of the cup that I'm about to drink? He's just told them about being mocked, about being scourged, about being crucified, a horrible form of death. And he said, it's going to happen to me. You able to do what I'm about to do? And they, whether they said it in a flippant way or not, the attitude was certainly that, oh yeah, we're able. But what's going to happen in just a short period of time? When that arresting crowd comes into the Garden of Gethsemane and they start to take Jesus in custody, what are James and John going to do? Turn and run, just like Peter and Andrew and Philip and Thaddeus and the others. Jesus is getting them to stop and think for a minute, to count the cost. Guys, didn't you just hear what I said? That you're following me doesn't mean that you're going to have a life free from suffering, free from pain, free from tragedy. Because you see, we have the James and John problem ourselves. Whether we want to admit it or not, we're hoping and expecting that because we've put our faith and trust in Christ, that we'll not have to suffer the loss of a loved one, or the loss of a job, or the breakup of a relationship, or a debilitating disease, or any of the bad things in life that can come up out of nowhere and just rearrange our world in a nanosecond. James and John weren't really counting the cost of what it means to be a follower of Christ. Christ is going to be mocked. Christ is going to be scourged. He's going to suffer the most painful, ignominious way on earth to die. You able to follow me even there? And so Jesus is correcting them there, saying, my cup you shall drink. But to sit at my right and my left, that's not mine to give, but it is for the one whom has been prepared by my Father. You see, Jesus is fully human but fully God. And because he's now still in human form, he's saying, you are going to suffer for me. Sure enough, James, the older of those two brothers, will die a martyr's death before we get out of the book of Acts. Judas is actually going to be the first of the disciples to die, but as we know, Judas wasn't really sold out to God. He's going to betray Jesus for mere money. Then when he realizes that the religious leaders intend to kill Jesus, Judas regrets it, but he doesn't go to Jesus to seek forgiveness. He runs out and takes his own life. James, though, is going to be one of the faithful 11. And by Acts chapter 12, Herod will have James put to death. Yes, James, you are going to suffer a martyr's death. John is going to go through many times of torture. He'll live to be an old man, but he'll have been tortured repeatedly physically and ultimately exiled to Patmos, where he's going to write the book of Revelation. Yeah, there's going to be suffering. There's going to be a price to be paid for following Jesus. And Jesus just told them, yes, boys, the day will come when you are going to suffer for my name's sake. But as far as the level of reward, who's going to sit at my right and left-hand side? God alone knows that answer yet. And hearing this, the 10 became indignant with the two brothers. You see, they're not off in some quiet corner, whispering to themselves, having a conversation that nobody else can overhear. Recently, I had a after-church impromptu meeting with a member of the church where we needed to talk privately. And so when the benediction was done, we came back here at first to the fellowship hall because we just needed to have a private chat. And other people started coming into the fellowship hall. We weren't having a fellowship meal, but some people wanted to get something out of the refrigerator. Some wanted to make sure that the lights were turned off, that the doors were locked. So we retreated even further into a classroom to deal with the question that we needed to deal with. We were trying to have a private conversation, and we didn't want other people to overhear what business it was that we were discussing, because we need to take care of some business before bringing it before the whole church. So we were trying to have a private conversation. Jesus wasn't having this conversation with Aunt Salome and with James and John privately. The other guys are around. They hear it, and they're immediately indignant. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence that Matthew is recording this years later, and that he puts the question that James and John and their mother was asking right after Jesus' teaching about that vineyard owner choosing to give the late-come workers the same salary as the people who had been working all day. You see, the 10 who were indignant when they heard what James and John were asking, Matthew was one of them. He's one of the ones who was mad at James and John for jockeying for a better position than what I'm getting. They had the same problem that those vineyard workers had. Who do you think you are? You're trying to use your family connection to Jesus to get a higher position than me? Well, I've been a disciple too. You know, they had the same kind of attitude that the workers who'd been in the vineyard all day. The 10 became indignant with the 2 brothers. And they probably started to fuss at him. Who do you think you are? That kind of a thing. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it's not the way among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus is letting them know, fellas, it's not about me-itis. It's not about jockeying for position and who's going to be greater and more important than somebody else. You want to be like me, fellas? You've got to put other people and their needs ahead of yourself. You've got to be a servant leader. So essentially, he's rebuking them all there, giving them something to chew on, to think about, because it isn't going to be long till he's going to go to the cross and the grave. And then he's going to ascend back to heaven. And they're going to have to figure out how to carry on the mission and learn to support and take care of each other and back each other up against persecution that's going to start increasing on them. That instead of being worried about who's on first, that they need to be willing to sacrifice themselves to take care of the needs of other people, to have the heart and mind of Christ, to be a servant leader. It's not going to be too much longer before we're going to hit the chapter that deals with that Passover meal in the upper room. And sure enough, they're all sitting at the table, and it's assigned seating, and it's by rank. The one sitting on Jesus' right is considered to be the best friend, and the one on the left is considered to be the one that Jesus says is the guest of honor tonight. And the one who's all the way around on the edge, at the last seat of the party, is supposed to be the one who plays the role of a servant if there's no servant available, and they're supposed to get up and wash everybody else's feet. They've got another lesson coming up in the near future. When Matthew's writing this, it's all past history. He's looking in the rearview mirror, but he's also having to look out the windshield, so to speak, as he's writing this to a group of Christians who needed to understand what real leadership was, what it means to be a follower of Christ, to serve your fellow man because of the love that you have for your fellow man, because of the love that Christ has shown to you. As they were leaving Jericho, they've come down from Galilee, they're now at Jericho, they've crossed the Jordan River, they're 17 miles from Jerusalem. They're almost there, where the triumphal entry and the week of teaching and the Passover meal and the Garden of Gethsemane and the cross are awaiting them. They're getting close to their destination. As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. And 2 blind men sitting by the road, hearing that Jesus was passing by, cried out, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." The crowd sternly told them to be quiet, but they cried out all the more, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." And Jesus stopped and called them and said, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Lord, we want our eyes to be opened. Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes, and immediately they regained their sight and followed him. Jesus has already healed some other blind people, but this is happening as he's almost on the outskirts of Jerusalem. And the huge crowd is there. Those blind men are there as beggars because the huge crowd's going to come by that way, and they're hoping to get charity from this crowd. Some crowd, instead of feeling compassion and pity on these blind men who can't see to work and who are calling out to Jesus, wanting him to heal, the crowd's telling those two men to shut up. They're treating him like, you're in our way, you're bothering us. They're not going to give charity to those men. And they're trying to tell the men, shut up. We need to see Jesus, but you're less worthy than we are. But what does Jesus do? He stops. And he heals those men. And it should have been a huge sign to everybody in the crowd. He really is the Messiah. Because from the prophet Isaiah, they knew from their scriptures that one of the ways they would be able to recognize the Messiah is that he will be able to cure blindness. Nobody was ever healed of blindness in the Old Testament. Other diseases, yes. Some were even brought back from the dead. But nobody was able to cure blindness. And Isaiah had told them that one of the things you'll be able to use to recognize who your Messiah is, he'll be able to cure blindness. And here Jesus is on the outskirts of arriving in Jerusalem, 17 miles. And he's just healed two blind men who are going to get up and follow him. Crowd's going to follow him too. Some of that same crowd is going to be there in Jerusalem when Jesus gets on the donkey and rides into town on the day when they select the Passover lamb. And some of those people are going to be cheering, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And some of them mean it. Some of them get it. But some of the same crowd who will be cheering for Jesus as he comes into town will turn and run when it comes time for the arrest and the crucifixion. Some of them aren't going to follow Jesus all the way. But those two blind men, they now have their sight. And they can see physically. But more importantly, they can see spiritually. That reunion that I went to this weekend, when I decided I was going to leave the party about a half an hour before it was over with, so I could get a head start on heading back home. Some of my classmates were rightly concerned about my safety as a woman driving alone, as now a senior citizen being able to see well enough to drive at night. And that was touching, because they were concerned about my physical well-being. These crowds who'd been following Jesus, seeking to get healing for themselves, seeking to hear his teachings, seeking to have him go and throw out Rome and establish his kingdom and end some of the persecution that they've been living under. Some of them had some selfish reasons for following Jesus, to the point that they didn't care about these other needy people. They just wanted Jesus to take care of their needs. And as it turns out, the formerly blind guys can now not only see with their physical sight, but they can see with their spiritual sight. Chapter 21, when they have approached Jerusalem and had come to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied there and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord has need of them,' and immediately he will send them. This took place to fulfill what was spoken of through the prophet. And then Matthew's going to go ahead there and quote part of the Old Testament in verse 5. Jesus has already clearly made arrangements with the person that owns the donkey for him to have the right thing. Matthew is reflecting back on this, chapter 21. My headline for this one, my outline was the triumphal entry. Matthew's writing this gospel about 30 years after the events, and he's looking back and he's remembering things, and he's remembering that Jesus had the details worked out already. 2 of the 12, Matthew doesn't name them. We'll find in one of the other gospels that Peter and John are going to be the 2 who are going to be sent ahead to prepare for that Passover meal. This is the triumphal entry. 2 of Jesus' disciples are told, go to that village across the way. You're going to find a donkey tied up outside, untied. If anybody asks you any questions, who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you taking that donkey? You just tell them the master has need of them. Now looking back on it, looking in the rearview mirror, Matthew is remembering, the prophet Zechariah told us that one day people would be able to recognize the Messiah. Not only was he going to be able to cure blindness like Isaiah said, but Zechariah told us that our Messiah would come into town, meek and lowly, riding on the back of the donkey. That day is now in Matthew's account. The donkey's going to be presented to Jesus. He's going to climb on the back of it. He's going to start to ride from the Mount of Olives down into the Kidron Valley and then back up again to go in through the eastern gate and get to the temple. And the crowd who's there, because that's the route everybody takes to come to Jerusalem, and they know that because it's 10 Nisan, the day when the lamb is selected, that the religious leaders will have the national Passover lamb paraded in that way. The crowd will be there to cheer, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And Jesus is following down the hill right behind that donkey or that Passover lamb. And some of the crowd get it. And when the lamb passes, they have cheered for the lamb. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And now when Jesus is coming, they're going to cheer for him too. And the religious leaders are going to hear it. And they're going to reveal their character. They're going to tell Jesus, tell this rabble. Remember, these people are supposed to be the religious leaders. They're supposed to be the ministers, the servers, representing God to the people and the people before God. And instead, they're emotionally the elites and they're looking down on the people they're supposed to serve. And they're going to tell Jesus, tell this rabble, these nobodies, these deplorables, if you would. Tell them to shut up. Because you see, those religious leaders, they may have physical eyes to see, but they don't have the spiritual eyes to recognize he's healed people of blindness. He's made the lame to walk. He's correctly reciting the scriptures and teaching. He qualifies to be our Messiah. They're blinded spiritually, even though they have physical sight. Verse 6, the disciples went and did just as Jesus had instructed them, and brought the donkey and the colt, because it's a year-old donkey. It still needs its mother close by. And they laid their coats on them, and he sat on the coats. Most of the crowd spread their coats in the road, and others were cutting down branches from trees and spreading them on the road. The crowds were going ahead of him, and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" When he had entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. Again, Matthew the tax collector, now Matthew the disciple, would have been very interested in Jesus going in and kicking over the money tables and calling people to account for cheating the people, because you see, that's what was happening. You were showing up at the temple and you had your offering for God, your sacrificial animal, and they were inspecting it and they were going to find something wrong with it. But you still need to go and give an offering to the Lord, and they won't take your offering. Now what do? Well, you're in luck. This is your lucky day. We just happen to have right over here an animal that's acceptable for sacrifice and for the low price of, and then they'll quote them some exorbitant, cheating them type price. You can have this animal if the price is right. Well, now they've got their animal that they brought with them. They can either take it all the way back where they came from, or if they don't want to have to be bothered with that animal that they can't use for the sacrifice, well, we'll take your animal off your hands, and again, it'll only cost you X amount. And what was happening is they were going around the corner and recycling those animals. They were cheating people, robbing folks in the very house of God by the people who were religious leaders. And Matthew, remembering what he used to do for a living, he was the IRS before he became a follower of Christ, would have definitely noticed that. And he records it in his gospel. Jesus saying, it's written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you're making a den of robbers. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. There again, he's proving time after time after time, qualified to be Messiah, qualified to be Messiah, qualified to be Messiah. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he had done, and the children who were shouting in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became indignant. The religious thought police. And they said to him, do you hear what these children are saying? And he said to them, yes, have you never read? Out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise for yourself. And he left them, and he went out to the city of Bethany and spent the night there. Now in the morning, when he was returning to the city, he became hungry. And he's going to see this fig tree. And he's going to let it be known it's not the season for figs. But the fig tree appears to have figs on it. It's got its leaves. Fig trees have their leaves and their fruit at the same time. This is the fall of the year here in the Wiregrass. I have 3 pecan trees in my front yard. They're the last trees to bloom in the spring, but as soon as they started getting their leaves, I don't get pecans right away. Pecans are on the ground right now. They're falling from the trees as the leaves are falling. And right now, I've got lots of birds and squirrels coming into the yard, and occasionally I'll have friends or neighbors who come and knock on the door and say, hey, can I get some of the pecans out of your yard? And they're welcome to them. But you see, my pecan tree bears its fruit well after it first has its leaves. But the fig tree was full of leaves, and it's supposed to have fruit at the same time that it's got leaves. So Jesus goes over there expecting to find fruit. But the tree doesn't have any fruit. It's just got leaves. Truth be known, that tree is a hypocrite. It appears to be a fruitful tree, but it's got nothing. And so Jesus will place a curse on the fig tree, and the next day, when the disciples are passing that way again, they will see that in the space of 1 day's time, that tree has completely withered to the ground. And they marvel at that, and Jesus reminds them, don't be like the fig tree, where you appear to have good fruit, but you really have nothing. You see, there's one hypocritical fig tree in that group of disciples. Judas is going to be one of the 12 going into town with Jesus. He's going to hear the crowds cheering Hosanna. He's going to see Jesus kick over the money tables. And Judas is deciding, I don't really think Jesus is doing this the right way. I'm going to go cut a deal with the priests. They're looking for something to accuse him of. I'm going to give him the opportunity. And he's going to go cut a deal with the priest, and they'll lay out for him 30 pieces of silver, the price that the law required for a broken slave. And by the time the week is to Thursday night, Judas will leave that upper room table, leave the Passover early, but he's not leaving the Passover early to go and do something for Jesus. He's not even leaving because he needs to go home and rest. Judas is going to leave God's table because he's cut a deal with the devils. He's cut a deal with those religious leaders to sell Jesus out for the price of a broke slave. And he's going to lead them to Gethsemane, where Jesus and the disciples will spend the night, and he knows that's where they're going to be. And he'll betray the Lord with a kiss. And Jesus will be arrested. And Judas will be close enough by to know when the religious leaders condemn Jesus to death. And that's the point at which Judas is going to realize, oh, wait a minute. I didn't mean for it to go that far. And Judas is going to try to undo what he's set in motion. He's going to try to give the money back. Because you see, it's not going to be revealed in Matthew's gospel. It'll be revealed in John's gospel, and John's not going to write at the same time Matthew is. John's going to write his gospel about 25 years later. John will reveal that after Jesus' death, the disciples discover that Judas, who has been their treasurer this whole time, has been secretly stealing money from the common purse. When Judas realizes that Jesus is going to be condemned to die, he's going to realize it went too far. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. He wanted Jesus to set up his kingdom, and he wanted his place in the ruling group. He was forcing Jesus' hand because he didn't like this talk about suffering and dying. He wants Rome kicked out and a new government established with him and the other 12 being part of the ruling class. He wants to join the elites. And when he tries to undo it, instead of going to Jesus, the one he's wronged, he takes the money back to his co-conspirators, and they pronounce judgment on Judas and on themselves. We can't take that. That's blood money. What's Judas going to do? In his despair, when he realizes it's gone too far, I can't stop it, I've done something that I can't fix, all of a sudden that money bag that he's holding, that he was so proud of, that he had been quietly lining his pockets with, that he'd been stealing from the rest of the group, all of a sudden, money lost its interest. And when the religious leaders refused to take the bribe back, in his despair, he throws the money on the temple steps, and he goes out, and he chooses to take his own life. Judas is one of the most tragic figures in all of history. He could have gone to Jesus and asked for forgiveness. He could have marched up to the foot of the cross as Jesus was hanging there dying for the sins of the world. Jesus is praying for the people who are executing. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. If Judas had chosen to show up and throw himself at the feet of the cross and say, I'm sorry, Jesus would have forgiven him. But Judas didn't choose to go to Jesus. And the tragedy of Judas is that he died in his sins. He was so close, and yet so far. Next week, when we're looking at chapters 22 and 23 of Matthew, we're going to be looking in detail at the events that happened during Jesus' Passion Week, the times when he's being tested by the religious leaders, given trick questions, his teaching in that upper room, his washing of the disciples' feet, his going to Gethsemane, his going to the cross, when we're looking at the events of what happened to Jesus during that Holy Week, we need to try to put ourselves in the story like we were Matthew or we were Andrew or Philip or any one of the crowd. And we need to make a decision. What are we going to do with Jesus? Because that's why Matthew is writing the gospel. He wants people to know Jesus is God in the flesh. He's the Messiah. He's our only hope for reconciliation with God. That if you want to be part of the kingdom of heaven, you've got to come to faith in Christ. And so we need to take a close look at what it means to follow Jesus.